Today, we uncover the most unlucky deaths ever recorded. From a jackpot winner taken down by a single champagne cork, to a student who survives a highway wreck just to have that luck run over in the most horrifying way possible. It was July 6, 2013, on Interstate 280 near Daly City, California. Southbound lanes were busy under clear afternoon light, with steady traffic moving between 60 and 65 miles per hour. Construction signs ahead warned of narrowing lanes. Concrete barriers divided opposing traffic, and shoulders along parts of the corridor were limited. When collisions occurred on this stretch, disabled vehicles and responders often operated within active roadway space until full closure could be established. May Leon Joe, 22, had boarded an intercity charter bus in San Jose earlier that day. She was returning home after visiting relatives. A business student, she preferred organized schedules and had chosen the coach because it stopped closer to her apartment than the train. She sat midway down the aisle on the right side, near a window, with her purse at her feet. The ride had been uneventful as the bus traveled north toward Daly City. Shortly after mid-afternoon, traffic ahead slowed abruptly near a construction narrowing. The bus was traveling approximately 60 miles per hour when the driver applied hard braking. The coach veered slightly left, clipped a pickup truck, and then struck the concrete median at an angle. The front corner absorbed most of the impact. The bus rotated, tipped partially onto its side, and then settled upright across multiple lanes. Windows fractured, overhead compartments opened. Several passengers exited through the rear emergency door and broken side windows. May sustained moderate injuries but was able to move under her own power. She stepped away from the damaged coach and made her way toward the inside shoulder near the median barrier, where debris, insulation, shattered glass, and small luggage fragments covered the pavement. She sat down close to the concrete divider as smoke from the engine compartment drifted across the roadway. Fire engines and highway patrol units arrived within minutes. Traffic slowed but had not yet been fully diverted. Responders directed ambulatory passengers toward the shoulder while assessing others near the bus. Visibility shifted as wind pushed smoke low across the lanes. Survivors, emergency personnel, and damaged vehicles occupied overlapping sections of highway while the scene was being stabilized. A heavy-duty recovery wrecker weighing approximately 45,000 pounds was dispatched to secure and reposition the bus. The operator approached slowly along a partially closed lane nearest the median, advancing at an estimated 5 to 10 miles per hour. From the elevated cab, the damaged coach was visible ahead, but the pavement directly in front of the truck's long hood was obscured by its height and the lingering smoke layer. May remained seated on the roadway near the barrier. As the wrecker moved forward, its front bumper passed over scattered debris. The right side tires then rolled across her torso before the vehicle came to a stop. The operator later reported feeling unexpected resistance and immediately halted. Emergency medical personnel reached her within minutes. She was unresponsive at the scene. A post-mortem examination documented extensive crush injuries to the chest and abdomen. Multiple ribs were fractured inward, compressing both lungs and the heart with rapid internal bleeding. Findings were consistent with compressive force from a heavy ground vehicle rather than injuries sustained during the initial bus collision. Investigators reconstructed the truck's path using dispatch logs, positioning data, and traffic camera footage. They determined that contact occurred after passenger evacuation had begun, but before the roadway was fully secured. The death was ruled accidental, and no criminal charges were filed. Reviews that followed recommended clearer separation between heavy recovery equipment and survivors during active highway closures. It was February 3, 2018, in Pasig City. Evening traffic moved steadily beyond the gates of the mid-rise complex as courtyard lamps cast pale light across the concrete. The air was still. Inside, televisions murmured and pipes clicked. Around 6:30 p.m., raised voices from a ninth-floor unit carried into the hallway. Behind that door lived Clara Medina, 34, an accountant whose work depended on accuracy and documentation. Her days were structured around spreadsheets, reconciliations, and audit trails that required precision and control. At home, she maintained similar routines: bills filed in envelopes, receipts sorted by month, school schedules pinned to a corkboard near the kitchen. She and her husband, Luis, 36, a sales agent who spent long hours traveling between clients, shared the two-bedroom apartment with their young son. Most evenings followed a predictable rhythm shaped by deadlines, traffic, and late dinners eaten after work. Earlier that afternoon, Clara had confronted Luis about messages she found on his phone. By early evening, the exchange had grown louder. Neighbors later described sharp voices and the scrape of furniture shifting across tile. Luis arrived shortly after 6 and was recorded entering the building lobby at 6:42 p.m. Within minutes, residents below noticed movement along the 9th floor balcony as Clara climbed onto the metal railing. The balcony was narrow, formed of poured concrete with waist-high steel bars. The drop to the courtyard below measured approximately 90 feet. There were no awnings, trees, or structures beneath to interrupt a fall, only open concrete. Residents across the courtyard later stated they saw her standing on top of the railing for several seconds. One neighbor reported that she appeared unsteady as she shifted her weight forward. Moments later, she tipped forward and fell. At nearly the same moment, Luis exited the main entrance and stepped into the courtyard, walking forward from beneath the overhang. From that height, a body of her size would reach approximately 45 to 55 miles per hour before impact. Witnesses stated she descended feet first. Her heels struck Luis across the upper chest and shoulders. The force drove his sternum inward as both bodies collided with the ground. The impact produced two sharp, heavy sounds in close sequence, followed by silence. Emergency services were called immediately. Responders arrived within minutes and found Luis unresponsive. He had no pulse upon assessment. Clara remained conscious but had sustained severe fractures to both legs and an unstable pelvis. She was immobilized and transported to a nearby hospital. The post-mortem findings described the damage in direct terms. His chest had been compressed with extreme force, fracturing the breastbone and multiple ribs. The broken ribs punctured both lungs. The sudden compression ruptured the heart, causing immediate and extensive internal bleeding. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the chest from a high-velocity impact. Clara survived her injuries and was charged with reckless imprudence resulting in homicide. Court records show she later entered a guilty plea and received a prison sentence of several years under Philippine law. Luis was pronounced dead at the scene from blunt force trauma to the chest. Custody of their son was granted to Luis's parents. Following the incident, the apartment complex raised the height of all upper-floor balcony railings. It was October 19, 2014, along Route 1 in Saugus, Massachusetts. Light rain had been falling for hours, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective beneath passing headlights. The roadway curved gradually before tightening near a break in the guardrail, where the shoulder narrowed to less than 4 feet. The posted speed limit was 50 miles per hour. In wet conditions, traction dropped quickly, especially across darker patches where water pooled. That night, Ethan Morales, 19, was driving his 2006 Honda Civic with two friends in the car. He had been licensed only a few months. The Civic, purchased used from a relative, was mechanically sound, but lacked the side impact protection found in newer vehicles. In the front passenger seat sat Liam Carter, 19. Behind him was Noah Patel, 18. Traffic moved steadily despite the rain. Shortly after 10 p.m., the Civic entered the curve at approximately 55 miles per hour. As the bend tightened, the rear tires lost traction on the unevenly wet pavement. The vehicle began to yaw. Ethan steered right, then quickly corrected left. The correction overcompensated. The Civic rotated sideways, exposing the passenger side to the outside of the curve. With limited runoff space and a narrowing shoulder, the car slid laterally toward the guardrail. The impact crushed the passenger door and forced the side structure inward into the front and rear seats. The guardrail deformed but did not penetrate the passenger compartment. Liam sustained catastrophic chest and head trauma and was pronounced dead at the scene. Noah, pinned behind the collapsed door frame, suffered severe compressive chest injuries and was transported to a nearby hospital where he later died. Ethan was removed through the driver's side with fractures and a concussion. Police and EMS arrived within minutes. Toxicology reports showed no alcohol in Ethan's system. Investigators later cited wet pavement and speed above the posted limit for conditions as contributing factors in the loss of control. The following evening, October 20th at 8:25 p.m., 6 classmates returned to the same stretch of road to leave flowers near the guardrail break. Traffic continued moving between 50 and 60 miles per hour. The shoulder remained narrow, and several of the students stood close to the white line as vehicles passed within a few feet. Glenn Reardon, 44, approached the curve at approximately 55 miles per hour in an SUV. Phone records later showed he glanced at a GPS navigation screen for about 3 seconds. At that speed, his vehicle would have traveled more than 240 feet without full attention to the roadway. His right tires drifted onto the rumble strip. He corrected left. The SUV fishtailed briefly on the wet surface before sliding back toward the shoulder shoulder where the group stood. The vehicle struck multiple pedestrians at an estimated 45 to 50 miles per hour. Hannah Ruiz, 20, was thrown onto the grass beyond the curb and sustained severe head trauma. Mark Feldman, 19, fell beneath the front of the vehicle and suffered catastrophic thoracic injuries and massive internal bleeding. Both were pronounced dead from blunt force trauma. 2 others sustained long bone and pelvic fractures but survived. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Glenn remained at the scene and later cooperated with investigators. He was charged with motor vehicle homicide and negligent operation. Court records show he later entered a plea and received a custodial sentence under Massachusetts law. Autopsies in both crashes cited blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Following the incidents, reflective signage was added along the curve, guardrails were extended, and restrictions were placed on roadside gatherings in high-speed zones. 4 young adults died within 24 hours on the same stretch of road, each collision shaped by wet pavement, limited shoulder space, and seconds of lost control. It was September 9, 2017 in Biloxi, Mississippi. The late sun hung low over a rented back deck near Back Bay as warm air drifted in from the water. A folding table held paper plates and plastic flutes. A chilled champagne bottle sat in a bucket of melting ice while friends gathered close. Harold Kinley, 67, a retired dock supervisor, had won $50 million days earlier after playing the same lottery numbers for decades. He had spent most of his working life on the waterfront, checking cargo loads, inspecting tie-downs, and enforcing safety rules around equipment under tension. Friends described him as methodical and careful. The wind brought relatives and neighbors to his home, but he kept the gathering small. An uncle arrived carrying a large format champagne bottle that had been transported in the trunk of a car before being placed on ice. The glass label included small print instructions advising that the bottle be pointed away from people and that firm control be maintained over the cork once the wire cage was removed. Champagne typically contains internal pressure between 70 and 90 pounds per square inch, comparable to the pressure inside a vehicle tire. Condensation formed along the neck as it sat in melting ice. Hands were damp from the bucket as relatives and friends gathered closer, some raising phones for a group photo. Harold positioned the bottle on a lightweight plastic patio table set over a seam in the deck boards. The surface flexed slightly when he leaned forward. He twisted off the wire cage, set it aside, and wiped moisture from the foil with his palm. Witnesses later stated that the bottle was angled slightly upward rather than directed away from the group. The table shifted subtly as he pressed down to steady it. When he adjusted his footing, his grip loosened for a brief moment. The cork, already under sustained internal pressure, began to move within the neck. Without restraint, the built-up pressure forced it outward rapidly. At close range, champagne corks can expel with significant speed, capable of causing injury if not controlled. The cork expelled and entered his open mouth as he inhaled to speak. It struck the soft palate and continued backward into the oropharynx, lodging at the entrance to the airway. He immediately grabbed at his neck and stepped back, unable to produce a sound. Foam spilled across the table as the bottle discharged. Harold collapsed to his knees and then onto the deck. The group recognized he could not breathe. Emergency services were called immediately. Bystanders attempted abdominal thrusts and back blows, but the obstruction did not dislodge. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found a complete airway blockage. Ventilation attempts showed no chest rise. Visualization revealed swelling and a dark obstruction at the airway opening. Attempts to secure an airway were unsuccessful due to the obstruction. He was transported while resuscitation continued, but was pronounced deceased shortly after arrival at the hospital. The post-mortem examination identified a champagne cork lodged at the level of the laryngeal opening, completely obstructing the airway. There was fresh bruising and swelling around the airway consistent with forceful impact. Toxicology showed no alcohol intoxication. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxia due to airway obstruction by a champagne cork. The death was ruled accidental and related to the discharge of a pressurized container during a private gathering. Later that month, his family established the Kinley Harbor Fund, using part of the lottery winnings to support maritime safety scholarships and purchase protective equipment for small coastal crews. The bottle and table were collected for documentation, and the deck was cleared after the investigation concluded. It was April 18, 2016 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Humid morning air pressed against the siding of a small single-story house as power lines flickered after a brief overnight storm. The backyard grass was still wet. Inside the narrow utility room, light filtered in from an open back door, falling across a wooden shelf lined with clear glass bottles, none of them labeled. Walter Walt Broussard, 94, had lived in the house for decades. A retired shipyard welder, he kept habits formed during years when nothing was thrown away if it could be reused. He stored nails in coffee tins, screws in tobacco cans, and fuel for the lawnmower in rinsed whiskey bottles. Advanced cataracts blurred his vision, forcing him to rely more on memory and placement than fine detail. He knew where things were by routine. Bottles with dark caps sat on one side of the shelf. Drinking water was usually kept within easy reach. That morning, Walt planned to sand and repaint a rusted window frame inside the utility room. The power continued cutting in and out, stopping the box fan and leaving the air heavy. Sawdust lingered from earlier work. On the shelf beside him sat two clear bottles with similar dark caps. One contained drinking water. The other held paint thinner he had poured in the previous afternoon after cleaning a brush. A roll of masking tape remained unused in a drawer beneath the bench, something a niece had once suggested he use for labeling. As he sanded the frame, fine dust irritated his throat. He began coughing and reached for a drink. The larger water jug near the sink was empty. Without hesitation, he lifted one of the clear bottles from the shelf. A neighbor trimming hedges later said she glanced toward the open doorway and saw him tilt the bottle, but could not see which one he chose. He swallowed an estimated 2 to 3 ounces before the sharp chemical taste registered. He pulled the bottle away immediately, coughing. The liquid triggered a gag reflex. As he inhaled sharply between coughs, a portion of the thinner entered his airway. Hydrocarbon solvents can spread quickly into the lungs when aspirated, irritating delicate lung tissue. Walt bent forward over the workbench, coughing violently as his eyes watered. His breathing tightened. Within moments, harsh coughing fits continued, and a thin foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. His breaths became rapid and labored, producing audible wheezing. Hearing the distress, the neighbor stepped inside and pushed the bottle aside. She saw that he was struggling to breathe. Emergency services were called immediately. Bystanders attempted abdominal thrusts and back blows, but the obstruction and irritation did not resolve his breathing difficulty. Responders arrived within minutes and found him conscious but in severe respiratory distress. His breaths were shallow and frequent, and his pulse was weak. Oxygen was administered before he was transported to a nearby hospital. At the hospital, physicians determined that paint thinner had entered his lungs during the coughing episode. Despite oxygen therapy and supportive care, his breathing worsened over the next several hours as inflammation spread through his lungs and oxygen exchange declined. He was later pronounced dead. The post-mortem examination noted irritation of the esophagus, solvent odor in the stomach, and fluid-filled lungs with inflammation, consistent with hydrocarbon aspiration. Damage to the air sacs prevented adequate oxygen transfer. The cause of death was acute respiratory failure due to hydrocarbon aspiration. Authorities ruled it accidental poisoning. Investigators documented the unlabeled bottles and the shelf where they had been stored side by side. Afterward, his family removed reused containers from the home and disposed of remaining solvents properly. The morning began with routine work in familiar surroundings. A single mistaken reach, made in a dim room among identical bottles, ended his life hours later. It was November 12, 2015. Quezon City carried the damp weight of a recent rain. Exhaust hung low over the intersection as traffic compressed into tighter lanes and jeepneys idled beneath flickering lights. Storefront shutters rolled down in uneven rhythm, and a covered basketball court echoed faintly in the distance, while pedestrians thinned along the sidewalk. Rogelio Duran, 52, worked as a timekeeper at a bus terminal near Cubao. He logged plate numbers in a ruled notebook, tracked arrivals and departures, and assigned bays over a handheld radio clipped to his belt. The job kept him beside idling engines for hours, breathing diesel and standing on concrete that vibrated with each departure. Clinic notes from earlier that week recorded elevated blood pressure and advised rest. He stayed on schedule, covering extra hours that Thursday after a coworker called in sick. Shortly after 8, he left the terminal with his lunch tin in a plastic bag. Light rain had returned briefly and stopped, leaving the road slick. Vehicles stacked along a side street feeding into the main avenue, slowed by a mall sale nearby. He paused under a pharmacy awning to let a bus pass and then stepped toward the curb. At 8:14 p.m., people waiting at the corner saw him falter. His right arm dropped as if it no longer belonged to him. His right foot dragged instead of lifting. The left side of his face tightened while the right side slackened. He reached for the tiled wall beside the pharmacy window and slid down, shoulders scraping the glass. A small trash bin tipped and rolled into the gutter. He tried to speak but formed only broken sounds. Emergency services were called immediately. Dispatch sent an ambulance from approximately 2.3 miles away. The unit cleared its bay and moved east with lights and siren, threading through tightening traffic. At an adjacent junction less than a mile from the scene, a motorcycle entered the intersection against a red signal. The bike struck the ambulance's front left corner with a sharp metallic snap. The impact damaged the steering components and disabled the vehicle. The ambulance shuddered, tires skidding briefly on the wet paint lines, before the driver braked and steered toward the curb. The crew radioed that the vehicle was disabled and requested another unit. On the sidewalk, Rogelio's breathing became uneven, pulling in shallow bursts. His head tilted forward and then back against the concrete. His eyes opened but did not track faces. His right side lay motionless while his left hand flexed weakly against the pavement. Moisture from the ground soaked through his shirt. Traffic continued moving in compressed waves a few feet away. A second ambulance arrived several minutes after the first unit reported being disabled. Medics placed an oxygen mask over his face and started intravenous access while assessing pupil response and motor function. He did not respond to verbal commands. They loaded him onto a stretcher and transported him under siren. At the hospital, a CT scan revealed a large intracerebral hemorrhage. A blood vessel inside the brain had ruptured and released blood into surrounding tissue. The accumulating blood increased pressure inside the skull, compressing areas responsible for movement, speech, and breathing. Despite supportive care, the swelling continued. He was pronounced dead later that night. The autopsy confirmed a fatal hypertensive brain hemorrhage, officially listed as intracerebral bleeding due to chronic high blood pressure. Medical review indicated the hemorrhage was extensive and associated with a high fatality rate, even with immediate intervention. The collision report cited the motorcycle's red light violation and steering damage that disabled the first ambulance. Officials later reviewed signal timing and adjusted ambulance routing, while his belongings were returned to his family and the terminal reassigned his post. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.